2. The Bible says, beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospereth. So meaning our prosperity spiritually is supposed to be the same way we prosper also physically. Now, when you look at the health message in our church, you will realize that in the 19th century, there were some prevalent health beliefs. Without the widespread availability of physicians in the first third of the 19th century, many Americans depended on self-help books and articles for information. Most of the doctors and physicians of that time, those ones who were helping the sick, were just reading articles and books. You get the knowledge was not well drafted out the way we have it today. And you find, so they were using self-help books. That is why you find there are so many books that exist from the 19th century on what we call homeopathy. It is the idea that you can actually make preparations from your home and you can handle many conditions. So they were handling things like dyspepsia, consumption, tuberculosis, and in addition to the limited number of physicians, there was a far-reaching distrust in the regular, heroic physicians whose painful treatments included bloodletting and violent purgatives. In contrast, the irregulars, including botanics. So you realize that in that period, most of the time, they were using anything that they considered in harmony with what they practiced and believed then. And that is the reason why, by the way, do you know what killed George Washington? George Washington died from a sore throat. But what actually killed George Washington was not the sore throat. It was the treatment that was administered, which was worse than useless. You get the point? Because they removed 3.7 liters of blood from his body. They kept removing, he did not get better, they kept removing more blood and they kept removing more blood, because in those days, they believed that bloodletting was a way of handling disease. So they actually drained off his blood till he died at 68. Before they drained off blood from him, they gave him a mixture of vinegar, molasses, and butter to cure the throat infection. I don't know if you're getting how absurd that was. But that was the best medical practice that could be given to the former president. He died at 68 merely because he had that cold. He was working in the wood, it was snowing, it was too cold, and he kept working for several hours and it affected him the way you get a sore throat. But the treatment administered was worse than the disease. You get the point? So that was the condition, by the way, in that period. There was a herbal system that was put in place, but there were a lot of problems then. By the way, many medicines that were prescribed then are now known to be poisonous. But did you know that mercury and tobacco were used? In fact, one of the physicians who visited George Washington gave him an enema of mercury. You know an enema? Mm-hmm. An enema is an insertion of a fluid that is either to cleanse your body or to heal or to remove constipation through your rectum. You get it? And sometimes in our practice we feed. If someone cannot feed through the stomach, we feed them through the rectum, especially when they have severe stomach cancers and such like conditions. So they were using mercury and tobacco. But the way Jane Longborough, I think you know Longborough, he was one of our pioneers. Mm-hmm. Actually, as an 18-year-old preacher, was advised to use tobacco to relieve chronic lung difficulty. And that is the reason why most of you who know Charles Spurgeon, used to smoke regularly without a thought in his mind that it was wrong, because that was the practice when in that time, you get. Most preachers and most doctors used to smoke. So when Sister White writes about smoking, she's speaking how many years before her time? It seemed absurd, you get. So those are very common things to be done then, actually. And he smoked cigars for 2 years until he pictured the contrast in his mind between the filthiness of tobacco and the purity of those who dwell in the New Jerusalem. Feeling nothing should defile him, he threw his cigar into the river and abandoned forever the use of tobacco. Mm-hmm. So if you try to look at the state of the world during that time, you will realize that the system of medicine at that time indicated that most of the treatments were actually worse than the actual diseases. America in the early 19th century was a sick and dirty nation. Public sanitation was grossly inadequate, and personal hygiene virtually non-existent. That is why if you studied, probably you've heard of Nightingale. Florence Nightingale, you've heard of her. She received a Nobel Prize. You know why? Because she introduced sanitation to the medical practice. People used to perform surgeries without washing their hands. You get the point? Yeah, without wearing gloves. That was the state that was there. Can you imagine someone doing a surgery somewhere in the body without washing their hands? And right now, if you don't wash your hands before you eat, what happens to you? You get a running stomach, isn't it? So it was a dirty nation. There was no hygiene even in the medical practice. The great majority of Americans seldom if ever bathed. That is why when you read there, some people were treated in context. You have to get the word on bathing that is thrown around. At that time, people seldom bathed, by the way. Fruits and green vegetables seldom ever appeared on the table. And the food that did appear was obtained saturated with butter or lard. Lard is just animal fat. So those were the things that they were actually using a lot in that duration. And that is the reason why you realize that scurvy was a scourge. You know scurvy? What causes scurvy?
Vitamin C.
Lack of vitamin C, meaning essentially they are not even eating what? Fruits. Some of these things were existing then because of those complications. Actually, early Adventists suffered the same poor health as other Americans. J. Longo writes that I was a great lover of animal flesh as food. I wanted fat pork for breakfast. That is an Adventist preaching. And he says, boiled meat for dinner, cold slices of ham or beef for supper. One of the sweetest morsels was bread well soaked in pork gravy. So if you look at the whole lifestyle of these people, this is Gospel of Health, October 1899. If you look at the whole lives of these people, you will realize that essentially they were living on that idea that there was no proper guidance regarding health. And that is the reason why there were some reform movements. By the way, the 19th century began a period of great reform in America in education, prisons, abolition, and women's rights, politics, and even health. A distrust of heroic medicine, purging, bleeding, etc., and its lack of results turned many into preferred treatment based on sound principles and common sense. Health reform movements arose across the country, promoting various isms: vegetarianism, renunciation of all evil habits, development of physiological societies, and many other things. And by the way, if you didn't know, among some of these things that took place, we are not the pioneers of vegetarianism, by the way. You understand that? These things were actually being taught. Some of the, if you listen around to people who are attacking Sister White, they claim that she was a plagiarist because some of the counsels she gives on health were actually being aired before she gave them. You get? But we are not pioneers in these things. There are people who already were conducting reform movements and teaching some of these things. I was even looking at the obituaries of Adventists. And these are the obituaries in the Review and Herald. That is 1857 and 2063. And what do we read there? What was the age of Seventh-day Adventists at death? One is slightly more than a quarter died before. That is very high infant mortality. And that is the reason why we can see that even in the lives of Ellen White. She lost her son. She lost her son quite early. So infant death was common, and that is why they had to have many children, because who will survive? A quarter of them died before the age of 7, another quarter died between ages 10 and 29, and thus virtually a half of all SDA recorded deaths in this period became before the individual attained his or her 30th year in life. That is why there were early marriages during that time. You get it? Mr. White got married at
17,
and James White was at 23.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So it is not, I'm not saying that now you get married. We are just trying to say infant mortality was very high then. People were expecting to begin living early. You get it? You want to settle down? Less death, catch up with you before you achieve some of these things. So you need to know the background, by the way, of the health message. Causes of death were overwhelmingly from communicable diseases. Nearly a half perished from pulmonary diseases, that is tuberculosis, that was then known as consumption. We will look at some things about infectious disease probably before the week is over. Typhoid, diphtheria was very common then. These were the major causes, by the way, of death. So if you look at them, they are majorly infectious diseases. Death was not respect of persons. Frequently, the funeral services were conducted without the presence of a minister. Death was a common, frequent, and most unwelcome intruder in every Adventist family. So I don't know if you're seeing the setup of the people who are living during that duration and who are moving from the Philadelphian church to the now beginning Laodicean church. If you look at it, you can see the set of things that we can observe there. So the practice of medicine 200 years ago is what led to the death of George Washington. He died because the medical practice then was not sound. And I want you to understand that even with modern science today, there are so many changes that have been made, but we cannot totally and completely say that modern medicine is sound. Okay? There are still some complications that we have with modern medicine. And those are some of the things that we are going to look at. There are areas where modern medicine is many strides ahead. And there are areas where we are yet to understand. That is why we have a unique message to the world. We are together. The things we need to solve are things that cannot be solved conventionally. They cannot be solved by what the world is looking at. They can only be solved if we look at the mind of God. So George Washington died from bloodletting and a mixture of poisons that were given to him because he was having a sore throat. So the people who killed him were his doctors. By the way, there were 3 physicians, some of the best. They cancelled together, they removed more blood, they met again and said, yes, they removed much more. Hadi ikifika, they removed 40% of his blood. Hata wewe ukitolewa 40% of your blood right now, what is left? And you're sick. So eventually he died. So the need today, while mortality rates have been materially lowered in the past 150 years, the health condition of the average American is still seriously at risk. But this also applies to the whole world. We can't say that this is just America. Because today, we are told by 2025, out of every 3 people, 1 will be having cancer. That is according to American Cancer Research Institute. They are saying that by 2025, out of every 3, 1 will be having cancer. And they're saying out of people who are above 40 years old, out of every 2 people, 1 has a heart disease. And half of those who have it don't know. You heard me? Yani watu wengi wako na heart disease hawafanyi nini? Hawajui. So meaning our parents and most of those who are 8 right now, most of them are having heart diseases. By the way, if you didn't know, 1.5 million people have diabetes yearly. This is statistics. You can find that in World Health Organization and CDC websites. That is what they are claiming is happening in the world today. Heart diseases are the ones that are killing people. We have cancers all over the world. Cancer is number 2 killer, by the way, if you didn't know. These are things that are happening all over the world. By the way, today you will find cancer attacking an old woman who's never come to the city. Right in the village. Many of the cancer cases that we even manage in medical missionary are cases that we never expect should be having cancer. It's somebody who's been living in the village all their life, and you're wondering, how do they get cancer at this age? Meaning, there's a lot of things we need to learn about health. Health is not simply living in the village. Are we together? Health is a lot of things. Health is so many factors that need to be put. So, US ranks low in the World Health Organization's roster of wellness among the nations of the world. So you look at these things, you realize that these are quite severe cases. So the typical Western diet, by the way, is what we are taking in the world today. Even right now, I think ideally in school, what are you eating? Are you eating the typical Western diet? Tea, coffee, milk, eggs, bread, butter. Is that what you take? Yeah, KFCs around, Dalitos, and some of these places. And in the supermarket, we normally say in the supermarket you should walk around the edges, because at the center usually is a lot of processed food with so many things. You find the typical Western diet is the major culprit in the world deteriorating health. Sugar consumption has risen by 250% in the last century. A century ago, 75% of all protein intake came from plant foods. What about today? 75% is derived from animal sources. You know, the issue is not protein. The issue is that our forefathers did not eat so much protein from animals the way we do today. And then we clothe it with science. You get it? We will look at some of these things, the myths and misconceptions regarding nutrition. So in the life of an individual average American, which we can say this is by 1995 because they've done much research. Do you know how many things you eat? 15 cows, 24 goats, 12 sheep, 900 chickens, 1,000 of fish and game, 26,250 of dairy products. So if you look at the whole concept, you realize that people are taking a lot of protein from the animals, pounds and pounds of fish and dairy products, and this is what we are having in the world today. This type of diet is high in protein and fat, but low in fiber and carbohydrates, and deficient in minerals and vitamins, is a sure prescription for early disease and untimely death. We will look at the science behind this. But if you subsist on a high animal protein diet, I can guarantee you that if you don't have a kidney failure before you die, most probably you will have stones in your kidneys, or you'll have stones in your gallbladder or in your vessels, or you will have a heart disease. You may have a stroke by the time you get to 60 or 70. You may have some heart conditions. All these things are simply because the world is being given garbage when it comes to nutrition. We've not understood the concept. So what are the 7 reasons for the health message in the church? I want us to go through this quite fast so that I work with the time duration. One is that we might do what? We might live longer. Are you seeing the mortality rate that we've seen in that period? Half of Adventists were dying before what age? That you get. So that we might live longer. Number 2, that we might enjoy the years we have. That is the reason why the health message was given, by the way. That we may live without disease and sickness. Another thing is that we might be enabled to render service to God longer and more efficiently. That is one of the reasons why we've been given the health message. There are so many SOP quotes that support this, but I don't want to dwell on that. I want to get straight to the point. Number 4, the Seventh-day Adventists might be a good witness for the remnant church, that we may be witness. Our message is holistic. It is not just restoring the spiritual, but the mental and the physical. We cannot have a lame message that is one-sided. There is one more issue. Another issue that makes us have the health message is that we might help non-Adventists find the benefits and blessings of good health. We are the ones who take this message to the world. That is also one reason. Number 6, that our mental perception might be sharpened to better understand secular and spiritual truth. The brain nerves, which communicate with the system, are the only medium through by which God can communicate to man. Meaning, for us to perceive things, we must have a clear mind. A clear mind is depending on good health. Number 7, that we might attain greater spiritual growth and development. We cannot be spiritually sober if we are diseased in the body. That is the reason why the health message is an entering wedge to reach the sick and bring the gospel to them. So those are the 7 major reasons why we are given the health message. I don't know if you've heard of Sylvester Graham. If you've been to any medical class, probably you've heard of him. But he's one of the key figures of health reform revolution in the 1830s. But he was also very controversial because the ideas he brought forth were very radical. And by the way, most of the things this guy says are similar to the things that we find in our books. Sylvester Graham was born in West Suffolk, city in 1794. His father and grandfather had been ministers and he wanted to become a minister too. But poverty forced him to delay his studies. In 1823, at age 31, he entered Amherst College but withdrew after a short period of time due to illness. During this illness, he continued studying and he became a Presbyterian minister. Graham had apocalyptic visions and became obsessed with reforming society. And some of the things that he had in his reform movement is, in particular, Graham argued that an unvegetarian diet and the consumption of alcohol caused disease and... Now, can you imagine by 1830, he was saying this. 1844 is when we had the disappointment. So when was he saying this? Before we even had the movement that brought this church into existence. I don't know if you're seeing how far this was. Way before. One key component of his dietary prescription was the consumption of Graham flour, which is coarsely ground and unsifted, which means unmolded. This is whole grain, isn't it? That was one of his prescriptions. Wheat flour often pressed into a dry cracker. In his later years, he lived in Northampton, Massachusetts, where he died in 1851. So you can see that this guy was advocating for beliefs that we think came with Adventism, by the way. By 1831, Graham was lecturing independently on vegetarianism and temperance. You can imagine that. He visited major American cities in the East and gathered a large group of followers. His views became more extreme. He came up with this statement: all medicine as such is itself and what? And evil. Graham's studies on sexuality were also quite extreme. He linked spicy food, meat, alcohol, tea, and coffee to increase sexual urges. Have you heard things like that in the testimonies? Now you are wondering why we are being accused of being plagiarists. You get the point? Graham was doing this, and he was doing this in major cities. If you look at, I don't know how I took these pictures here. I think I didn't put the picture well because I was putting the pictures together. But he preached on several evils, even if things like masturbation and some of the things that you've seen in the testimony, he spoke about. Yeah, yet science today has a hard time putting fingers on that. You get the point? If you look around, you'll find they're talking about the benefits of masturbation, the benefits of I don't know what, the benefits, advantages of taking alcohol. I don't know if you've read those articles. Yeah, alcohol has some benefits, marijuana, taking tea, coffee has some benefits even to the brain. You read some funny stuff today. And by the way, I tell most people, by the way, science studied independently of God can confuse you more than anything. Because who is the authority? If I wake up and do a research, and I tell you I've done 100 studies and I've discovered that smoking can increase your life by 10 years, and I have the support of science, what happens to that study? There is science. I've put it in a lab, I have done my research. I can dispute whoever came up with the early aspect. You get the point? And that is the reason why it's very hard to put fingers on things unless there are things that we can see. There are many other health reformers, including Dr. James C. Jackson, who had the house in Dansville. You'll find this, by the way, in the Spirit of Prophecy. I'll mention it one due to time. Jackson promoted 10 natural remedies: air, food, water, sunlight, dress, exercise, sleep, rest, social influence, mental and moral forces. Have you heard of things like this? Now you get, this is our home on the hillside, Dansville, New York. That is 1870. So you can see that most of the things that we are seeing here, Dr. R.T. Troll, a very popular physician, famous for conducting a practice entirely without drugs. All history attests the fact that wherever the drug medical system prevails, desolation marks its track, human health declines, vital stamina diminishes, diseases become more and more numerous, more complicated, and more fatal, and the human race deteriorates. On the contrary, wherever hygienic treatments are done, the point I think is putting across is that there's a transformation and a change that comes with hygienic therapies. Have you had sentiments like this in the Spirit of Prophecy? Now, we need to understand something very important. There was something that was going on during this period, and there was a need for a change. Ellen White was shown a vision in 1848 that tobacco, tea, and coffee were harmful. Now, she didn't get this by study. She got this by revelation. That is in 1848. A public stand against tobacco use was not, however, taken until 1855. That is when the SDA Church took a public stand against tobacco. Meaning, before 1855, what happened? People would just smoke in church, and there was nothing wrong with it. So these things became a public stand by 1855. The use of tobacco was made grounds for disfellowshipping members in Vermont in which year? 1855. Rescinded in 1857 with this action, resolved that the use of tobacco is a fleshly lust which was against the soul, and therefore we labor in the spirit of meekness, patiently, and perseveringly to persuade each other. So they took it out in the year that we can see, the 1857. So when you look at this, you can see the church was now ready to receive a major impetus to health education. Because number one, civil war was soon to end. Church members were becoming interested in health principles. Reformers were dying out in America because of other interests. SDA is not the first with these ideas. In many cases, by the way, we find the world is the one who began, then we follow. Are we together? I'm trying to share with you this history so that you know the basis of our message, ideally, is not simply temperance. We are going to look at this much further. On May 21st, 1863, at Battle Creek, Seventh-day Adventists organized themselves under a general conference which linked the scattered congregations. This new center had the promise of unity and efficiency. It would appear that God had waited until the organizational issues were settled before giving the young church a new assignment, one which depended on harmony and unity. On June 6, 1863, Ellen had her well-known vision. And if you look at this, you will realize, by the way, Adventists were not given health messages that were concentrated and strong until they were organized and united. You will realize that the health message in our church requires unity and organization. I don't know if you're getting me. It is not supposed to be presented when we are disorganized and at war with each other. It requires organization and unity because it's a message that has a particular interest to achieve. So we must see that this is one of the major points that we are seeing here. So this Oswego vision that was given on the year that we've seen there are issues that were brought to Sister White. One was lack of appetite control is intemperance, swine's flesh not to be eaten, tobacco in any form is a slow poison, strict cleanliness of home and body is important, tea and coffee like tobacco are slow poisons, rich cakes, spice, puddings are injurious, eating between meals is harmful to the stomach and digestive processes. Adequate time must be given to allow the stomach to rest between meals. Now, these are points that she was given in that first vision. Now, you can see God is now talking particular issues, but if you look at this concept, I was conducting I did a training at some point with Wildwood to come and see the basis of our message, and I realized something. The health message is not very complicated things. They are just principles that apply throughout the life. The problem is that when we come to health seminars, what do we expect to hear? Something that tickles the ear. You get the point? It is just not eating between meals. It is just sleeping on time. It is taking adequate water. It is consistency, regularity, orderliness, timing. It is trust in God. But if you look at the way she was given at that time, these messages appeared odd because of the lifestyle that they had then. Gluttonous appetite contributes to indulgence of corrupt passions, meaning overeating has a tendency to corrupt the character. That is the point she's bringing. Turning to a plain, nutritious diet may overcome the physical damage caused by a wrong diet. That is the basis, by the way, of natural treatments. If your kidneys are failing, your heart is failing, your organs are failing, if I put you on a natural diet and I put you on things that can change the environment of your body, I can actually make your kidneys come back to work. Yes. I can actually activate your organs to work. The point is bringing here. Reforms in eating will save expense and labor. Children eating flesh meat and spicy foods have strong tendencies towards sexual indulgences, as you can see there. And then poisonous drugs used as a medical prescriptions kill more people than all other causes of what? of death combined. So you can see again that her statements tend to be leaning to what Sylvester was talking about, what Tra was talking about, and what Johnson was talking about. You will see Jackson, you can see that they are putting together these things. Pure water should be used freely in maintaining, healing, and curing illness. That is why we have a whole segment we call hydrotherapy, which, by the way, she says is the most powerful treatment given to this church, by the way. We will look at some of the things about those therapies. Nature alone has curative powers. This is, she says again and again, that the power to restore lies with nature. We just must expel impurities and assist nature. Now, common medicines such as strychnine, opium, calomel, mercury, and quinine are poisons. They are all the spirit of prophecy, by the way. Parents transmit their weaknesses to their children. Then she says prenatal influences are therefore enormous. This is all about epigenetics. Today, science has put their finger on it. That, by the way, you transmit to your children not just your genes on physical appearance, but even behavior. You know that? So we call it today epigenetics. It is how your lifestyle affects your transmission of genes. That is what we call epigenetics. The way you are is most likely how your kids will become. So that is a very important point there that we can see. So another thing that we should also saw in that distribution is obeying the laws of health will prevent many illnesses. God is too often blamed for many deaths caused by violation of nature's law. Light and pure air are required, especially in sleeping areas. Bathing, even a sponge bath, will be beneficial in the morning. God will not work healing miracles for those who continually violate the laws of health. Many invalids have no physical cause for their illness. They have a diseased imagination. Cheerful physical labor will help create a healthy body, I believe. Outdoor exercise is important to the health of mind and body. Overwork breaks down both mind and body. Routine daily rest is necessary. You see, these are things they are very basic and very, very common. Many die of disease caused solely by eating flesh food. Caring for health is a spiritual matter, reflecting a person's commitment to God. A healthy mind and body directly affects one's morals and one's ability to discern the truth. All God's promises are given on condition of health. So you can even see how well-known summation in Ministry of Healing 1905, where she says pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water, trust in divine power. These are the true remedies. So if you look at this all, you'll realize that healthful living principles given to Ellen White in a vision on May 21st, 1863, but she and the church took time to apply the principles. She was given this in 1863, the same year that the church was organized into a conference when we were now united. But it took her time to even apply these things in her life. The GC and Michigan Conference committees could not meet in 1865. Two of the three members of each committee were ill. Weiss, Langoro, Smith all trekked wearily to Dansville, New York for treatment by Dr. Jackson. Do you remember him?
Yes.
Is that guy we talked about who already was doing treatments entirely without drugs? You remember? So they constantly went there for treatment. Jackson did not like Ellen White using salt at the table. And that is why Sister White wrote a letter to Jackson that salt is good. Have you read the Spirit of Prophecy? That she was shown salt is what? Is good. Because Jackson had an extreme idea regarding the use of salt. But we will look at salt a lot much more. So the concept we are getting is the issue of eating swine's flesh is a good example of an important biblical concept that had to wait until the church was ready for it. Do you know many pioneers of our church were pork eaters? Ellen White and her family included. They were heavy what? Pork eaters. The message had to come to them. Something had argued as early as 1850 that the Bible definitely forbids eating pig flesh. But James White thought that some of the biblical reasoning was inappropriate. That is why she writes, we do object to a misapplication of the Holy Scriptures in sustaining a position which will only distract the flock of God and lead the minds of the brethren from the importance of the present work of God among them. Meaning he's saying, the idea of teaching people not to eat pork is what? It's going to distract them from living the present truth. I don't know if you're seeing how the notion they had. This is the husband to the prophet. You get the point? So by 1858, the issue had been zealously pushed by the Haskell's, to whom Ellen White wrote this interesting counsel. Listen to what Mr. White wrote. I saw that your views concerning swine flesh will prove no injury if you have them to yourselves. But in your judgment and opinion, you have made this question a test. And your actions have plainly shown that your faith in this matter. It is the duty of the church to abstain from swine's flesh. God will discover it to more than 2 or 3. God will teach his church their duty. I saw that the angels of God will lead his people no faster than they can be led. So she's telling these people that you have a good message, but the church is not ready. I don't know if you're getting me. That is why you'll find a lot of counsel in the spirit of prophecy telling you that do not teach people not to eat eggs. The time is not ready. The time is not what?
It's not yet come.
The point is that the health message is progressive. It didn't bound the church once. Mr. White was given guidance that even the issue of pork was not to be presented as a test. I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm trying to make you understand the background of how our health message came through. The whites were not ready to take a position unless they had the clearest biblical evidence or a clear word from the Lord through a vision. Up to the health vision of June 6, 1863, they believed that the dietary restrictions set forth in Leviticus 11 as part of the Jewish ceremonial laws were no longer applicable since the cross. During the 1850s, Adventists freely ate pork. You get the point? Now, if you have this background knowledge, it is very easy. Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4, 124 and 26, we are told, after the June 6th vision, the issue of eating swine's flesh was settled among Seventh-day Adventists. Ellen White now wrote, God never designed the swine to be eaten under any. Now, are you seeing how her statements now change? They seem to be contradicting what she said initially. The eating of pork has produced scrofula, which is a Latin word for a breeding sore, a term for TB of the lymph nodes. So she's saying pork brings TB of the lymph nodes. Do we have pork city today?
Yes.
Yeah, it's there all over the world. It's present. Leprosy and cancerous humus. That is lymph nodes, cancer of the lymphatic system. Pork eating is still causing the most intense suffering to the human race. So you are seeing now she's showing revelation. Now the interesting thing with her writings is that they were revelations. I want us tomorrow to dwell on the uniqueness of the health message. I can't complete this today. But I want us to look at tomorrow what was unique about our health message. But I don't know if you've seen the background of the health message. Was it needed? It was needed, isn't it? It was barely needed, and it came when the church was now united, and there was a GC conference, and we had our first leadership that was set in place. The church was to go to the whole world. That is when God is now hitting the prophet right in her own lifestyle. By the way, the health message contradicted the life of who? Ellen White and her family right on the spot. She even says it was a very difficult issue for her and her family because the message cut across her beliefs and her thoughts. Now, if we look at this, it is going to be easy for us to see the connection between this by the time we get to Sabbath with the three angels' message. But I want you to understand, like we are studying, there's something unique with the health message that we've been given. Those unique principles are what make us different from the world. So tomorrow, I believe we'll begin at exactly 7. We're going to complete looking at the uniqueness of the health message. We will tell you the principles that Dr. Kellogg used when he was managing our first hospitals, how they were started, how they operated, how people were treated, and how the health message grew to what now we have as health reform in this church, and how significant it is for the last days. Are we together? Mm-hmm. Is there someone with a burning question? Okay. I'll just make a statement and you pray now.
So maybe you'll cover it later in this week, but I saw something about salt being good salt on the table being good. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can say something about it.
I'll make a comment on nutrition. So we'll divide this class so that tomorrow we look at the uniqueness of that health message. Ellen White's health message was not always unique. Adventists are not always the first to teach certain aspects of health to living. What was unique? Because kama ni vegetarianism, she's not the first. You get it? Kama ni treatment using natural remedies, she's not the first. Kama ni hizi mambo mengine za reform, tobacco, alcohol, she's not the first. You get the point? What was unique then? Let's come tomorrow and then we find out what was unique about the message that she was teaching. Let's rise and let's pray. We are praying. Heavenly Father, we thank you for what we've learned. We pray that it may impact our lives personally. As we part ways this night to meet tomorrow, we pray for the students who are here. The Lord, as you gave Daniel and his friends wisdom and knowledge, you may accord them. They've taken time to be in your house today. May you reward them in ways that they cannot imagine or even know. And Father, as we separate to meet tomorrow, create time for all of us to be here on time, that we may all be blessed as we study together. For this we ask in the mighty name of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Invite your friends tomorrow. Let's keep learning together. Those